Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Auntie Di, for welcoming us here. While we may be meeting in cyberspace, EWF is made and shared from the Wurundjeri and Bunurong lands. We acknowledge First Nations, First storytellers, and traditional owners of these lands and the wider Kulin Nations. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and to all elders this broadcast reaches, and of course to Auntie Di for her generous welcome tonight. I'm sure we would all love to read your story when you're ready to write it. My name is Ruby Rose Pivot-Marsh. I'm the Artistic Director of the Emerging Writers Festival, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to 11 days of projects, performances, and professional development for storytellers of all kinds. It wasn't that long ago that we held our program launch at the Wheeler Centre in front of actual people rather than screens. When we did launch in May, we were hopeful that this year we would be able to present you with a hybrid offering, a festival featuring in-person and online events. Obviously, that hasn't really worked out to be the case, but for us at EWF, it doesn't make it any less of an exciting offering. In fact, we worked our little butts off moving most of our festival online in about a week to make sure that we could bring you an entirely digital festival. A digital offering opens up so many other opportunities, particularly for attendees, to experience the festival and engage with emerging storytellers. EWF is a tiny but passionate team that I'm so proud to be a part of and to work with. The dedication to this festival and to the artists we engage with from this tight-knit team never ceases to amaze me and make me proud and a little bit emotional. At the final moment, we were able to make the switch to online yet again, and we'll be putting on over 50 events and projects and programs over, we've programmed over, I think, 200 artists still. I'm about to do a bunch of thank yous. So I want to firstly say thank you to Alice, Kat, DM, Millie, and Zoe, who are the EWF team. Thank you for your energy and vision and enthusiasm all the way through. Thank you to our board for your support, particularly in the past few weeks. Thank you to our major partners, Australia Council for the Arts, Creative Victoria, and City of Melbourne. Thank you also to City of Melbourne Literature Office for your support. More thank yous to our principal publishing partner, Hachette, and to all of our partners, supporters, and donors for investing in emerging storytellers. As I mentioned at the program launch, EWF turns 18 this year. I want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience and artists, for helping us celebrate this wonderful festival throughout its many iterations across the years, and for always sharing new and exciting approaches to storytelling, connection, and literature. This festival exists and is special because of you. This evening, it's my great pleasure to host Collective Imaginings, where 4 wonderful artists, Veronica Gorry, Dr. Janine Lane, Madeline Heyman-Reber, and Alice Skye will help us kick off 11 days of writing, reading, and exploring. Before I welcome each of these artists to the virtual stage, I'd like to introduce Minister Danny Pearson to officially mark the opening of the festival. Thank you.
To begin with, I'd like to acknowledge the First Peoples and traditional owners on the land from which I'm beaming in and where you all are as we meet in this virtual space. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, to the powerful First Peoples writers who we'll be hearing from tonight, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people tuning in. Thank you, Auntie Di Kerr, for your wonderful, warm welcome to country. It's an honour to join you, Ruby, and the Emerging Writers Festival team, to Councillor Jamal Hakim from the City of Melbourne, the festival's artists and writers, and all of you for the launch of this year's virtual festival. Well, while we hoped we would be meeting in person, the festival team is adapting at presenting amazing and engaging experiences online over the next 11 days, and tonight is no exception. This is just such a really incredibly important festival. It presents a wonderful opportunity where we can have the rich and diverse voices of our community heard. For far too long, the creative sector has been dominated by, white, male, Anglo-Saxon voices and views and opinions, and all too often those lived experiences become almost like the only experience seen and appreciated in our community. This festival is so important because it presents an opportunity for new voices to be heard, new voices from a diverse and rich community that we all live in. 50% of Victorians have a parent, at least one parent, born overseas. 25% of Victorians are born overseas. This festival plays a really important role in ensuring that those voices can be heard, because when those voices are heard, it reflects our society and our community, and we are all the richer for it. So I'm so proud and excited about this festival. I think it presents a wonderful opportunity for the richness of our creative sector to be expanded and explored further, and for great content to be created. Jane Harper won the Premier's Literary Award in 2015 for Best Unpublished Manuscript, and that became The Dry. Perhaps amongst you tonight, there'll be those of you who will write fantastic screenplays or a best-selling novel, or open up our eyes to your journey, your lived experience, so that we become richer and stronger and better as a result of it. So thank you so very much for having me tonight. I hope you have a wonderful festival, and I wish you all the very best. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister, for being here tonight and for your support of this festival and engagement with our artists, and for literature and the arts more widely. We appreciate it very much. I'd now like to welcome Councillor Jamal Hakim to speak.
Thank you very much, Ruby Rose. I'm Councillor Jamal Hakim. It's my pleasure to welcome you tonight on behalf of the City of Melbourne. Let me first begin by respectfully acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that we are meeting on and the various stolen lands that you are joining us from today. I'd like to pay our respects to the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung peoples and the Bunurong Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, and to pay respects to all elders, past, present, and emerging. And I'd like to extend that to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are joining us. Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Auntie Dyke. Storytelling is something that First Nations people truly understand, and I think it's something we can learn from. May I also acknowledge Minister for Creative Industries, Danny Pearson, my fellow councillor, Olivia Ball, Craig Semple, the Festival Board Chair, and Festival co-CEOs, Alice Muling and Ruby Rose. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to the artists. It's such a privilege to be here. I was lucky to have also joined the launch in person and to have been witness to a sneak peek of the amazing offerings in this festival. And being able to join virtually means we can continue not just the festival, but it extends the festival to more people, and it ensures that people of all accessibilities and all abilities are able to access the festival. In particular tonight, I think what I'm looking forward to, and through this festival, to the storytelling of our Melbourne's First Nations writers, and also the writings from diverse gender people who are sharing so much of their writings. It is a privilege to be able to take part and be there as well. As part of this much-loved Melbourne Festival, they all share in its uplifting spirit, the spirit of supporting and encouraging emerging writers to thrive. It is so important for us to ensure that there's spaces for our creatives to thrive and grow. As a City of Melbourne councillor, I find it a delight to read about your activities, your residencies, your alumni, and your ambassadors. So rewarding when you see emerging writers launched into fulfilling careers as a result of this early support. The mentorship, the money, the time and space, whatever is needed to ensure stories are told. City of Melbourne is proud to support this festival because the creative community is crucial to shaping our city's identity. Without you, we would not be Melbourne. You are part of that quintessential Melbourne, and indeed will be crucial to our city's recovery in these difficult days. Writing and storytelling are deeply embedded in our city, in our work, in our lives, in our narratives, and everything we do. They are expressed through your festival, through the Wheeler Centre, through the State Library, and our magnificent network of neighbourhood libraries. I'm so proud to have been able to move on our libraries so that we've abolished library fines, because writing and reading is something that is a basic right for everyone should have access to. But also through Melbourne as a UNESCO City of Literature. Most of all, stories are expressed through those who write and speak from them. Storytelling has been cherished in this country for over 60,000 years, and every day we have more to learn and more to enjoy. Melbourne is truly richer for its many cultural touchstones, and also tonight it is a pleasure to celebrate emerging writers and what you bring to the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great festival. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Councillor. Your enthusiasm for this festival has been nothing short of incredible, and we've felt buoyed by your encouragement of our work from the get-go. We're going to get into some readings now from the wonderful artists that I mentioned earlier, and it is my great pleasure to introduce the incredible Ronnie Gorrie to kick things off. Veronica Ojibgori is a proud Gunai Kurnai woman, the author of Black and Blue, published by Scribe Publications. She's passionate in nonfiction and is excited to extend this to film writing and writing children's books. Please welcome Ronnie.
I would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands we all meet on tonight. I pay my respects to the elders past and present, and to any elders here watching tonight. I'd also like to say that sovereignty has never been ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. I would like to thank the Emerging Writers Festival for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight, and I truly feel honoured to be able to speak alongside everyone here tonight. Woman Jindi Nektal Ronnie Gorrie. I am a Gunai Kurnai woman. My pronouns are she and her. I have recently published a book called Black and Blue, which was published by Scribe Publications. In my book, I have used bits of my language, the Kurnai language. For too long now, language has been lost due to colonisation and the settlers not allowing our ancestors to speak their language. If they were heard, they were tied to a tree and flogged. In my book, I use some of my language, but what's even better, as part of the Emerging Writers Festival, I've been selected to have my play performed with the Melbourne Theatre Company. This play is an excerpt from my book, Black and Blue, and is called Nalang. Nalang in my language means my father's mother. My grandmother was stolen from Lake Tyers Aboriginal Mission, Bungyar, in 1941, and my play Nalang predominantly features the Gunai language. My language. This will be the first time the language will be on stage. My book, Black and Blue, has almost been 10 years in the making. I commenced writing this in November 2011, the day before I was medically discharged from the police unfit for duties due to being diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety, and depression. As a result of my diagnosis, I was losing a lot of my memory. So I started to document as much memory I could, and before too long, I had a book worth of memories. This book is quite heavy in parts, as I am direct and quite graphic. In saying that, there are trigger warnings at the beginning of the book. I want you all to know that the writing of the book is about me and my family, including my children's experience. I don't want the reader to perceive it as every Aboriginal woman's story, that all Aboriginal women have experienced all that I have in my lifetime, because this is not true. And although I have been abused and assaulted by black men, I don't want the reader to perceive that all black men are abusive or violent, because it's not the case. I am married to an amazing black man. My father is an incredible black man, but most of all, I have raised an amazing and incredible black man. My son. My book in two parts. The first part is black and is an account of my life growing up as a black kid and then into adulthood. The second part is blue, where I speak about my experiences of being assimilated into the blue uniform of being a police officer. I also speak of the racism and bullying that I was subjected to whilst I was in uniform. But more than that, I speak about first-hand accounts of what I witnessed as a police officer, the brutality and the racially profiling of my people, Aboriginal people. Systemic and institutionalised policing I witnessed was unbearable, and as long as I have air in my lungs, I will continue to speak up and out about it. In the closing paragraph of my book, I stated that everyone has a story. We just need to listen long enough. I believe this wholeheartedly, and no matter how important you think your story is, there are other people who have a more important story to tell. Anyone that knows me will know that I absolutely love my Aboriginality. One of the main reasons I love about it is that the power of our storytelling. Aboriginal people, my people, are the oldest living storytellers in the world. For thousands of years, we've been telling stories. My ancestors told stories of the dreaming stories that have been handed down from generation to generations. It is a culture to have a yarn and maybe even to spin a yarn. We've been known to sit in campfires to tell yarns, actually we still do, but nowadays our yarns reach far and wide due to social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and that's powerful. Stories by us are powerful because a lot of stories are derived from our lived experiences, and we have been through a lot. Colonisation, genocide, massacres, the rape and torture of Aboriginal women and children, epidemics of diseases that wiped out entire families and communities, dispossession, and displacement. We represent 3.3% of this country, and yet we are the highest incarcerated in the country. This country has also had almost 480 Aboriginal deaths in custody since the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody recommendations were handed down. When Aboriginal people get that platform to speak or to write, no matter what field they are in, musicians, artists, actors, etc., we will speak and write about matters that affect us all. But be remembered that we don't speak on behalf of every Aboriginal person, but our own perspectives and for our family. So whilst I have a platform, I want to give you an insight into what it's like to be an Aboriginal person right now. Almost every Aboriginal family has been affected. Almost every Aboriginal family has been affected by an Aboriginal death in custody, including my own. When we hear of a death in custody, we grieve their loss, even if we have never met the deceased. We wrap our black arms around the family and support them. But whilst we are doing that, across the continent or in other parts of this country, we're having the commencement of coronial inquests in relation to past deaths in custody. So with this said, as a person, it's as if we are always grieving. It's relentless and overwhelming. I now want to talk to you about the coronial inquest process. This process can take 3 weeks in the coronial court, where police officers and prison guards are exempt and have legislative powers to not speak or to exercise their rights not to comment, and this is called their claim to privilege. In one particular inquest in Adelaide recently, in just one city, and to quote Natalie Arnold, who was present on this day and scribing so that information about the inquest is shared when the black community wrote, "I cannot recollect," was heard 45 times, and there were 71 individual claims of privilege. 71 from prison officers. This is so heartbreaking for the families who attend day in and day out to sit and watch the last people who saw their loved ones alive, and to watch them sit in the dock of the court and not be told any information of their loved one, their last words, etc. And this is gut-wrenching when all they want to know are the answers. For too long now, Aboriginal leaders, Aboriginal politicians in this country have had the platform to speak up. And in my opinion, the only one that does this is the Victorian Senator Lydia Thorpe. She has almost always spoken up about ongoing atrocities that our people are subject to. Though I don't affiliate myself with any political party, I thank her for using her platform. When I was growing up, I couldn't count on one hand the amount of Aboriginal writers or authors. There were writers of a different one during my day, musicians who wrote lyrics. But nowadays, we have so many literary writers and authors, we can fill an entire library, a collection of black writers, and how deadly it is. Our stories are slowly being heard and amplified, not just in this country, but all over the world. When I think about the role of Aboriginal people that have changed the world, I immediately think of Amy McGuire and the podcast that she created with Martin Hodgson. This podcast is called Curtin the Podcast. Through their podcast and investigations, they were able to acquire new evidence that resulted in the release of an Aboriginal man, Kevin Curtin, who had been wrongfully incarcerated for over 25 years. Those who haven't listened to this, do it. I'm not sure that my writing ever changed the world, but I can tell you his writing does. My amazing daughter, Nika Gori, Professor Aileen Morton Robinson, Professor Chelsea Watego, Alison Whitaker, Amy McGuire, Mariki Onus, and the new Greens candidate for Peter Cooper, Celeste Little, just to name a few. Now Kanitba, Nungu Makut, Kutbu, Now Number Wurba, Yarabi. Thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. Take care.
Thank you so much, Ronnie, for being a part of EWF again. It's a delight and a privilege to have you as part of this festival. And it was last year, and yeah, we're really excited to have you here. Thank you for sharing. You can see Ronnie, or you can catch Ronnie at the Nonfiction Masterclass, which is on Tuesday, the 22nd of June, where she'll be sharing more about her work. Next, I'm very pleased to welcome Janine Lane. Dr. Janine Lane is a Wiradjuri poet, writer and teacher, and she currently works at the University of Melbourne. Please welcome Janine.
Yeah. Yurdu Marang, everyone. I would like to acknowledge that I am joining you this evening from the lands of the Ngunnawal people in Canberra, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to thank Arnie Dye for her wonderful welcome. And I would also like to thank the team from the Emerging Writers Festival for asking me to speak, and acknowledge all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people speaking tonight and listening tonight. I'm sharing with you an excerpt from a story called Black Boxes, and this is me imagining what it's like to be free from being trapped from white fellas' expectations and to be outside of the white fella's imagination. White fellas can never decide what kind of black fella they want. The bar is always shifting, but whatever kind of black fella they want, it is never me. Once in the 1960s, when I was a child, they wanted us to look whiter, or at least exhibit no obvious signs of our blackness, irrespective of what we might carry in our hearts. Nobody could see that, so it didn't matter as long as we gathered, stored and carried on the inside. They didn't want us speaking language either, only English, because it is the language of power. But English always did do a different dance when it rolled off our tongue, a bit out of step with the power dance. Back then, they said we should try and succeed in Western education, learn their culture, their history, then we'd get ahead. And move to cities too, because they are the heartland of high white culture. Now we get into the 21st century and they want us to look black. The blacker the better, really. Any obvious signs of culture worn externally are great. If you come from a former mission or a remote community, that's of great interest to white fellas now. If you came through an alternative program designed for Indigenous people post-1980, even better. If you are young and tick all those black boxes above, you'll be a prize for any white Department of History or Anthropology at a university, because it will mean white fellas didn't really get rid of all the real ones. They saved some of us for their current exhibit. They've decided they like grassroots Aborigines now, as long as the grass is growing on the right side of the fence or somewhere down the valley yonder, where it always looks greener or blacker to the white lens. Well, I am well and truly middle-aged. I have olive skin. I was not born on a remote community or an archaeological site that white fellas might make a film or write a book about. My family escaped the mission system. I was fortunate enough not to be stolen. I cannot speak Wiradjuri fluently. And while weathering many uninformed, ignorant, and sometimes blatantly racist comments from both teachers and peers, I mastered a Western education system through the 60s and 70s. even gaining outstanding results in English literature and European history, even getting a prize from my school and 2 nice bright shiny stars on my high school certificate, indicating I scored in the top 10% of the state. I was encouraged to go out into the world by my aunties. They worked hard to put me through school, convincing and cajoling me all the way through some difficult times on the strength of the hope that our generation would make a difference. So I went to university with a white stream because I got in too, along with all the other first generation of working class kids in the late 70s and early 80s who got there. Thank you, Gough Whitlam. And we made some of our professors cringe and squirm because most of them were meeting the plebs for the first time. And I made it. And by then I was speaking and reading English better than the average white fella. At school and later at university, I got used to being outside the box. The box has always been there, but back then it used to be confined mainly to the heads of white fellas in governments. Back then I was outside the box because I was often the only Aboriginal student in the class and was never like the ones in the textbook or the ones that my lecturers had done their PhDs on. I was young and easily dismissed as inauthentic in those days, obviously delusional. I quite clearly exhibited none of the necessary outward display of cultural reference points. Aboriginal descent. One of my lecturers who'd written a book on Australian Aboriginal people for first year's history students corrected me when I told her after the first lecture that I was Wiradjuri from the Murrumbidgee River. Descent, she was adamant. The area was so early colonised that all the real Wiradjuri clans were cleared out in the 1880s. But my family wasn't cleared out. Neither were other Wiradjuri families who lived and worked around Gundagai and Tumut areas. But we weren't in the textbooks either. So that was the 80s, outside the box and inauthentic. And for the first half of the 90s, I was having babies and raising children. And it was towards the end of the 90s, when I was enrolling my children in local schools and looking to go back into the workforce myself, that the box appeared. And since then, they've been around with vengeance. And while life outside the metaphorical box that existed in the heads of white academics meant inauthenticity, I'm about to learn now about a new way of life at the dawn of the 21st century, life inside the box. Quite by accident, I landed a job in the tertiary sector in 2000 in an Indigenous higher education centre. I ticked the black box that now appeared on the new Department of Education form when I was applying to go back to the workforce. It was my first experience with the box. And it all begins when you tick that white space inside the black box on the form that asks, are you Aboriginal? It might seem like a small box, a fraction of a millimetre perhaps. You'd think at first you'd barely fit a tick or a cross within its boundaries, yet once inside, with just one flick of a pen, you're trapped forever. Within this tiny space is the mindset of settler Australia, the perceptions, permissions, exceptions, limitations of what blackness is to whiteness in 21st century Australia. And the gap between the box's minute corners is vast, and you can perish trying to trek across one side of the space to the other. Each straight line side is as inflexible as a cell wall. Once inside, you'll be trapped forever. It's impossible to escape this square. The empty expanse between the right angles is Arctic tundra, a white wasteland, and you'll wonder, as I do, how something that once looked so small could become such a bottomless maw, unbridgeable chasm, unsurpassable gap. A black fellow like me can spend their whole life running around in one of those black boxes and never get to the other side. And those fine black lines that seem so flimsy are impenetrable. But I didn't know that then when I first ticked the box. The university was indigenising its space and embedding Indigenous perspectives across the curriculum. I was told as the reason for me being put forward as a qualified Aboriginal teacher. And I was emerging back into the workforce after 10 years of motherhood into a brave new world of the 21st century. And I am now officially Aboriginal, not part or descent, but inside a box now, a black box. The university is transitioning, the dean told me when I signed the contract after I ticked the box. Your challenge, they went on, will be to prepare Indigenous students in pre-tertiary programs for tertiary entry. But my real challenge is educating the white stream. The average academic, settler academic, knows nothing about 21st century Aboriginality. Preparing students who are already bright, keen, enthusiastic, and most of all fully cognizant with the hard road our ancestors walked and the battles fought to get us the right to equal education in the first place is easy compared to explaining behind the scenes to white stream teachers why we all look the way we do now, which is very different and mostly not what is expected. Why we speak the way we speak, mainly Aboriginal English. Why we live the way we live, mainly in cities and larger regional centres. Why we don't all speak a language. Why we can't tell a Dreamtime story, as white fellas still call our creation stories. Or why we can't all play a traditional instrument. And why some of us don't want to study ourselves anthropologically, historically, or sociologically in the white academy. The demands of that box are vast. Many of my white colleagues spend a good deal of time lamenting the loss of our traditional culture, when our contemporary culture is alive and well all around, yet we simultaneously confused, confounded, surprised, and disappointed the majority of our white colleagues. I was 50 when I completed a PhD. At the same time, I was becoming to the end of a fixed-term contract and about to relocate from New York to Australia. I did my PhD on white fellas' obsession with black fellas in literature. I called it literary history and cultural literacy. How do you read a book that white fellas wrote about black fellas that really says more about white fellas? Pretty much everyone except my Indigenous supervisor thought it was unusual, but I obsessed with Catherine Pritchard, Xavier Herbert, Patrick White, and a long lineup of nationally and internationally acclaimed authors who depicted Aboriginal characters and they played literary chess with blackfellas and our stories, using us as pawn pieces in their checkerboard nation. These people are, after all, still part of the reason why whitefellas are experts on Aborigines. There have been no great epiphanies in the 21st century, but I am an optimist. I dream of a future, imagining a space where you have to sign your life away for white fellas could at least be a soft-sided circle, something not so angular and rigid, something that might just roll somewhere, even just an inch or two forward to close the gap across the vast chasm between the sides of the black boxes in white fellas' heads when they think about us. Change the shape of the expectation, maybe? Meanwhile, I dream of a brave new Australia where my children can rock up an interview and where the only expectation will be that they can do the job on the qualification, not spend so much time qualifying why we don't meet the boxed expectations of white fellas in the first place. Meanwhile, I dream up big, over the rainbow, outside the box. Mandanguru. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. It's wonderful to have you at EWF. I can't wait for Amazing Babes, where you'll be sharing with us again. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Madeline Heyman-Reber. Madeline is a Gomeroi woman and reporter for 10 News First Melbourne. She was previously at NITV as the channel's first Victorian correspondent. Her passion lies in social justice for First Nations Australians through storytelling. Please welcome Madeline.
Thanks, Ruby. Yama, everyone. First of all, I'd like to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and their elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge that this event is taking place on stolen land and that their sovereignty has never been ceded. I'm so excited to be speaking alongside these other deadly strong Black women tonight. I've chosen to read a piece that I wrote last year for the Saturday paper titled Remaking Our Newsrooms. It's on the lack of diversity in the Australian media. And I wrote this piece following the death of George Floyd at a time when frustration was building around the way Black stories are reported. And I've edited it slightly for relevance and time, but overall it's still relevant because not much has changed. I also think that when we're talking about the importance of language, it's also important to recognise the difficulties we face as Black journalists to have to adapt our own ways of thinking, writing, speaking and communicating when it comes to reporting on our own communities or working in the media industry in order to appeal to the rest of the country. So here we go. Australia is in the midst of a realisation, long overdue. It's a process galvanised by the Black Lives Matter movement, which has revealed how deeply ingrained racism is in this country, seemingly to the surprise of much of white Australia. A fight for diversity has been reignited, with many Indigenous people and people of colour harnessing the movement, while we have the country's attention to highlight issues and push for real, meaningful change, especially in the media. Last year, several Aboriginal journalists brought the issue of lack of cultural diversity and sensitivity in newsrooms and the broader industry to the forefront of this conversation. This is a conversation that we as Aboriginal journalists have been having forever, but one the rest of Australia is only now even close to being ready to engage with. In spectacular fashion, accomplished screenwriter and Jaru woman Cody Bedford courageously called out her ex-employer, one that we share, for institutionalised racism. In a way that could not be ignored, she took to Twitter to outline her time at SBS as a cadet journalist from 2008 onwards, recalling her experiences of institutional racism while working for the public broadcaster. After just 2 years, she wrote, "My writing was worse, my self-esteem destroyed. I had suicidal thoughts. The stress on my body meant that I developed eczema. I lost my period for 4 months. I stopped eating. A piece of toast filled me for the day because of anxiety." As an Aboriginal woman, I found it soul-destroying to read Cody's story, her vivid descriptions of the physical manifestation of her treatment. "This is what racism does," she wrote. But it was also that she had to describe her deeply personal pain so publicly in order for there to be any acknowledgement of this truth. I feel confident in saying that all Aboriginal journalists, myself included, shared her pain. We have all had those experiences in newsrooms to varying degrees. This time, though, something seemed different. This time, people were receptive. They listened to what Cody had to say and shared in a collective outrage and sadness. The all-white management team of our national multicultural broadcaster, something that had largely flown under the radar, was soon pointed out by writer and actor Michelle Law. This discovery fueled more anger from members of the media community, as well as the audience to which SBS appeals. Following Cody's revelations, Walkley Award-winning journalist and Murruwarri man Alan Clark wrote for the ABC on this issue of mental health of Indigenous journalists, citing his own burnout and deep frustrations he felt with the whiteness of newsrooms. Alan wrote, "For Aboriginal journalists like me, when we begin our careers, we're expected to take a saw and hack parts of our soul and our lived experiences until they fall away just to get a bloodied foot in the door." This was another piece that Aboriginal journalists across many media organisations all deeply resonated with, including me. Alan wrote about the trauma of our roles in community and society, how we are constantly exposed to sheer injustices of others before returning home and seeing it happen again to our own families. I've spent many hours crying for the families that I've built connections with when reporting on Aboriginal deaths in custody in particular. To get the story right and to tell it the way the family wants to be told, we must give the time required to understand their pain. But then at the end, it feels like all you can do is go and write a story about it. Many people and many other journalists don't understand that for Aboriginal journalists, our jobs don't finish when we leave the office for the day. We never get to switch off. We're constantly held to account by our families and our communities. We must uphold our reputations as community members and those of our families while attempting to communicate our ongoing trauma and pain to the rest of Australia. In the newsroom, we're subject to subtle racism. We're told to remain impartial, to be unbiased, and essentially to be white. That's impossible for Aboriginal journalists when we are reporting on Indigenous affairs. We're watching our own people die at the hands of the system to ask us to see past what it is to see past this and take on someone else's opinion who is not personally affected by the issue into account is to ask us to just get over it. Time and time again, I see the stories of my community told the wrong way by journalists who butcher them for their audiences under the guise of fair and balanced journalism, adding more trauma to my already traumatized community. This is why Aboriginal perspectives are important, not just as a box-ticking exercise, but as professionals with specialized knowledge. There is a dire need for systemic change in the media industry especially, and for the appointment of Indigenous people and people of colour to positions of power and editorial control who understand the issues we face in order for constructive change in the media to occur. There is a phrase often broadcast by blackfellas on our social media platforms prior to a significant event such as Invasion Day, or when blatant racism rears its ugly head. It goes something like, "We're asking you to dismantle the systems of oppression that your ancestors have built." To continue to ignore our voices is to continue our oppression and is, quite frankly, blatant racism. Upholding colonial values is not the way forward, and it does not reflect the multicultural society that we live in, work on, and believe to be vital. As Aboriginal people, our ancestors fought for us to be where we are today. It's up to us and those of you listening to continue the fight for a better future. Thanks.
Thank you, Madeline, for being part of EWF and for helping us launch this year's festival and for reading tonight. Finally, I would like to introduce Alice Skye. Alice Skye is a Wurgaya Wemba Wemba person living and writing music in Naarm. Since her first album, the critically acclaimed Friends with Feelings, she is signed with Bad Apples, the Indigenous-driven label that celebrates and prioritises Black excellence. Alice's upcoming album, I Feel Better But I Don't Feel Good, was produced by Jen Kohler, and her work continues to look inwards and explore finding staunchness in softness. Please welcome Alice.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everyone that has spoken tonight. I feel pretty emotional and really grateful to speak alongside all of you and have loved listening to you. So I thought I was being real tech savvy and I had my tablet up here to read my piece off, and it's just not working now, so just bear with me a sec. I'm going to find my piece for you because I don't have that good of a memory. But it just means that I won't be able to see the screen at the same time. But I have chosen to read a piece that I wrote you know what, I can do it off my phone. I'm so sorry. I've chosen to read a piece that I wrote for Urim Boy's Black Bloggers series, sort of deep within the pandemic, our longest lockdown last year. And I wanted to read this and then maybe afterwards sort of speak to how stories become timestamps. This piece is called Wichiwa, which in my Wurgaya language means to return or to come home. I miss the country. I miss being at home. The way the mountains feel like company, such a big personality. The way the air smells and the trees sound. I catch a cold each time I go home and it feels like the city is leaving my body. Sometimes I feel like leaving my body. I wonder if I'll ever write anything good again. I wonder if I've ever written anything good. I just moved house. I'm sitting in a pile of my things, wondering how long I can afford to be here. Is any of this stuff worth selling? Are any of my songs worth releasing? I hate the word webinar. My new housemates are talking about how we're practically cyborgs. And so the online and technological spaces we exist in are becoming an extension of ourselves. I can hardly cope with what's tangible to me, I refuse to take this on. I don't want to go to the online party. I spoke to my auntie on the phone tonight. She apologised for talking too much, but I hope she never stops. I'm so glad I'm black. I'm finally home. There's a fallen red gum blocking the driveway, and I remember that its Wagaya name is Bial. Bial, red gum, be weaker to fall. I'm in the far paddock and I can hear Mum chopping wood. My dad lived and I think he died near the mountains. Maybe I will too, with you are. So I know that tonight's theme is collective imaginings and the power of language in all its forms. And I mean, even just reflecting on each of these deadly women's stories tonight, I think everybody, you know, I think collective imaginings I first think of in a really broad sense, you know, in the way that especially our mob and our great leaders at the forefront create movements and action change, which I feel like each of the readers tonight do in their own amazing way. But in relation to the piece that I read tonight, I think of how our people live forever through stories. I think about my auntie Eleanor Burke, who I spoke about being on the phone to in this piece. I think about what she imagined for herself and our family as she continues to work relentlessly into her 70s today. I think about how that night I spoke to my uncle via her on the phone, who's sadly no longer with us. But I speak to her now and I still imagine that he's in the background with his other love of his life, their dog, Lady Collingwood. But finally, I come back to how telling stories is the one constant that I've had, spanning from seemingly tall tales like whose fault it is that my mum fell out of a window as a toddler. She's fine, but her siblings, even in their 70s and 80s, are arguing over whose responsibility it was. Spanning from that all the way to hearing my auntie say our great-grandfather's real name for the first time, Willaminga, the lost one. So I guess in kind of some sort of summary of all of that, collective storytelling is how they're still here and how I know they always will be and I can continue to be. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Alice, for being part of EWF again this year and for sharing your reflections with us tonight. It's been incredible to hear from everybody tonight. I want to say a big thank you to all of these artists, Ronnie, Janine, Madeline and Alice, for sharing tonight, and to Glenda and Linda for interpreting the event, and to all of you, our wonderful attendees. I can see there are a lot of you watching. Thank you for coming along to the opening of the 2021 Emerging Writers Festival. You can follow us on social media to keep up with what's happening during the festival. We have a number of projects which are now live on the website and will be updated throughout the couple of weeks for your enjoyment alongside our vast lineup of events. Of course, this isn't goodbye, but rather the beginning. We'll be seeing you in cyberspace. Take care and be well, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you. Bye.